Never seen Paul in uniform before, but I think it's a look we should encourage next year. This is a very personal experience of my time in Georgia. I won't pretend it covers everything. It barely covers a fraction of the things that we saw or the feelings I had there, but here goes. It's early September, and I turn to my mum and I say, "Ma, would you like to come to Tbilisi with me?" She thinks it's a joke, but she says yes quickly in case it's not. She hasn't visited Georgia since its Soviet days, but it is a part of the world that I know she adores. And so it is, about 2 months later, my 82-year-old mother and I embark on a trip for WJR that we will simply never forget. And we land, greeted with the warm hugs and common sense of our driver, Gorim, an extraordinary man. He speaks 7 languages. English is not one of them. So the trip immediately becomes this sort of babble of hugs and smiles and well-intended incommunication. His white van, how topical, but his white van is special. It's a sort of Scooby-Doo magical mystery machine, and it sort of turns into this, how can I put it, a kind of curious refuge from many of the most painful things that we're taken to see. I find myself using that van just to sort of try and get my thoughts together after I've made my visits. And we land and we drive through the city at dusk, and the first thing I see is President George W. Bush Street. For anyone in any doubt about Georgia's approach to the West now, we go past the Sephardi synagogue. It's glowing and it's warm and it's blue and inviting and it's irresistible, and it's next to the Vinoteca as well. So that works for everyone. We stop to have a look. And the next morning, we make our first home visit, and we leave this bright, sunny, blue, fabulous Tbilisi. And we arrive at the foothills of the Caucasus in Gori. It's Stalin's birthplace, many of you know, and it is snowing horizontally. In 2014, Tbilisi, it looks and feels like a part of the EU. They could host the Eurovision there and nobody would notice. But Gori feels like we have suddenly re-entered the Soviet Union. And beyond Gori, we go at the end of this very narrow track alongside an abandoned factory, and we find Koba and his house. And you can see us there. He's welcoming us in. Now, Koba is a retired doctor. What is extraordinary for me is to realize that he's only stopped working in the last 3 or 4 years. He's spent his life working in the field of phytology. It's the study of herbal medicine. He thinks that you can develop extraordinary remedies from herbs. Now he lives alone, save for the rats that we see running across the floor. He's got no running water. He's got no electricity. That's a story you've heard before, but it's still quite extraordinary to see it with your own eyes. And we step inside his house, and it is just as cold inside his house as it is outside. There's literally no change in temperature. But he's a scholar, and he's a deeply religious man. He quotes Rabbi Hillel at us, and he shows us the books that he's written. And I have this extraordinary, I suppose slightly snobbish reaction. I just think, you were so educated, you had a career, you should have had a lifelong retirement and a pension. How do you end up alone and in this kind of poverty? And it doesn't really make sense, my question, but I'm constantly trying to find this explanation. And he tells us that he can still do diagnoses. He says, if you give me your pulse, I can read your illnesses. And so you can see here, I give him my hand, and he leads me to the edge of his makeshift bed, and he's holding my wrist very intensely, and he tells me I have blurred vision and back pain and headaches and thyroid problems and indigestion and heartburn. By the time he's finished, it's a miracle I can even get up. But I realize as he's talking that it's much less a diagnosis. It's probably more a cry for help. Perhaps these are what he feels, perhaps these are his ailments, or perhaps he's loving the focus and the attention. This is the closest human contact that he seems to have had for weeks. He's as grateful for the hugs that we bestow and the conversation as for the material things we bring. He cannot thank WJR enough for all that they are doing for him, for all you are doing for him. And we learn that in the coming months, they will start putting electricity and running water into his house, and it will change his life immeasurably. But perhaps what they're doing most simply is remembering him in a world which seems otherwise to have abandoned him. I need a pee. And I suddenly remember he's got no bathroom. And I say to him as I'm sitting on the edge of the bed, "Where do you go?" And he says, "Outside." He just points outside. And he says, "In the summer, there are snakes." And then he says, with a twinkle in his eye, "I'm not afraid of snakes, only of mistakes before God." It's this deeply religious sort of thought. Anyway, I am a little afraid of snakes. But today, as I crouch there, I'm suddenly more afraid of frostbite. I think, what an extraordinary dilemma to think when am I more afraid of snakes today or frostbite because it's freezing? And it's this momentary, just minuscule entry into Koba's world. And I'm relieved and ashamed when I escape from it, back into the white van, huddled against the cold. The next day takes us to Rustavi. Now, this is a place, just to put you on the map, bleak enough to make Gorey look like Chipping Norton. You know, this is a town that was once dedicated to petrochemicals, but the factories have long closed, unemployment's high, and now it's where they bring their refugees here. You've all seen and studied these separatist wars in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. It's here, in conditions that are barely suitable for a donkey, that we meet Asida and her two small children, Nonna and Sandro, and you're going to see those kids. The children welcome us into a concrete room. And it's funny, sometimes you talk euphemistically about this idea of putting a roof over their heads. This is literally what they have. It's a concrete bunker. They have no windows, so they have to keep the door open the whole time because that's the only way they get light. There are live wires dangling down, you can just see on the side. There are naked bulbs, and this is where these little hands and feet are tripping and playing the whole time. Asida's husband has irregular work and a regular drink problem, which often turns to abuse. But she doesn't want to talk about that. She wants to talk about the bed that WJR bought her and about how they helped her enroll her children for nursery, how they helped her get on the computer, about the home repairs that they're sorting for her next. And her face lights up as she talks about WJR. The last visit of the day, still in Rustavi, is to see Svetlana and her grandson Dima in their borrowed hut, not even their own, behind a very muddy yard. This is Dima here, and part of the roof collapsed in his house. One bedroom is now wide open to the elements. That's how they sleep. Delightful Dima, 7 years old, takes out his drawing book. His great-grandfather was a famous engineer in Georgia, and he has managed to capture the precision, these tiny little mechanical lines in his sketches. And we all say, "Following in his footsteps." And we're sort of willing it to be true and not quite believing it can be. He has the talent, he has the love, and he has the patience. And in the right circumstances, he could be whatever he wanted. And I'm just praying that he will. There's a train set, and it's packaged up in a pristine box. It looks like an ornament, not a toy. And it is an ornament. He's never actually got it out and used it because it's too precious. And at that point, my mum gives him a little pair of magic gloves. I don't know if you've seen these ones for kids. They look tiny when you get them out of the package, and then you put them on, they grow with your hands. And he's absolutely enchanted. And I catch him when he doesn't realize I'm looking. He's wiggling his multicolored fingers, and he can't stop examining them. And then he goes out, and he's sort of enjoying them against the cold out there. And those gloves on the little fingers become sort of ridiculous, a symbol of what I will remember so clearly about this trip, the ability to transform, to create smiles and hope with just very, very tiny gestures, very practical gifts. And we stopped for lunch after this trip to Dima's house, and it's a strangely silent affair. And bear in mind, my mother loves talking to everyone. She loves practicing Russian on everyone, but this lunch has sort of silenced and stilled even her. And we've got no appetite, really. And my mother turns to me and she says, "What are you thinking?" And I say, I don't know yet. I don't actually want to turn it into a narrative or an explanation. I'm just sort of, I don't know. And it's really weird, but 2 days after I return, I start to see how I've been affected. I shout at my children over breakfast, and they've done nothing unusually wrong. But I shout because I'm looking at them and they've got so much, they've got normal, lucky little lives, and they don't even realize. And I shout because I've seen these kids with nothing and they are kids with everything, and I shout because broadly they have so much and so little in common. And I shout because with a different passport or born in a different place, I would have probably been visiting them. And on the way to school, my youngest son reaches into his coat, and it's just a gesture he doesn't recognize, and he pulls out a pair of his own magic gloves, multicolored fingers wiggling, a present, of course, from his grandma. And I begin my story. I tell Max about a little boy some 4,000 miles away who has exactly the same gloves as him. Thank you. Thank you. This is the good bit. This is the film, and I know many of you have been waiting for this, and they are always a remarkable point in the evening. You're going to meet 3 people like Dima, like their families, to whom you can bring hope tonight. So thank you for watching.